Well, cancer affects everyone, whether you've known someone who's personally battled it or have lost a loved one to the disease, or maybe you've had it. Last year alone, almost 2 million people were told they have cancer. Over 600,000 people succumbed to it. Early detection is key to survival, and now what's being considered the holy grail of cancer screening could diagnose some cancers earlier than ever before. Marty Salt has more.
Mammograms, colonoscopies, pap smears, CT scans. Millions of people are screened for cancer each year, but still 70% of cancers don't have screening tests until now.
It's a novel technology that enables one to potentially screen an individual's blood for up to 50 different types of cancer.
The Grail Gallery test is one of the first blood tests that looks for fragments of DNA circulating in the bloodstream and scans for markers that might have come from a tumor cell.
It uses your blood to look for signatures that may be indicative of a cancer.
By using 2 test tubes of a patient's blood, oncologist Elizabeth O'Donnell can see if cancer signals are present. A positive test means a signal that is associated with cancer has been found, but it does not mean you have cancer, and patients should be further evaluated.
The intent of all of these liquid biopsies is really to try and find these earlier stage, so stage 1 and stage 2 cancers.
Catching cancers early so treatment can start sooner and more lives can be saved. Marty Salt, WGEM News.